It was Easter Sunday. Lil Altimus, the old guard New York society figure, was having her annual Easter luncheon party at her vast Fifth Avenue apartment overlooking Central Park. In times to come, during her financial difficulties, Lil spoke of her Easter lunch as her farewell to Fifth Avenue party. All her Van Degen relatives, several of whom she didn't like, and some of her closest friends, like Matilda Clark and Rosalie Paget and K.K. Somerset, whom she'd known all her life, were present. We all went to Farmington, and we all came out the same year at the Junior Assembly, and we were all bridesmaids in each other's first weddings, Lil said about them every year in her toast. The star guest at the Easter luncheon was that perfect darling, as Lil always called Adele Harcourt, who was almost 105 and was still going about in social life. Adele was such a close friend of Mummy's, said Lil, who was herself 75, whenever she spoke about the revered Adele Harcourt. We think of her as practically family. Adele was celebrated for having given $200 million to the city of New York. She made appearances in slums to watch the improvements her donations made possible. She always wore pearls and furs on these excursions to building sites. "That's how they want me to dress," she said to Lil on occasion. She was used to being cheered by the crowd and enjoyed her celebrity enormously. There was also a small group of what Lil called her strays. Gus Bailey, a writer for Park Avenue magazine, used to argue that he was more than a stray. They had a curious friendship. Lil and Gus had met years earlier at the Kurt von Rautbord attempted murder trial in Newport, Rhode Island, which Gus had covered for Park Avenue magazine. Lil, as the best friend of the comatose heiress Antonia von Rautbord, ever since they were roommates at Farmington, was a witness for the prosecution. Gus was impressed at how unafraid Lil was on the stand when she was cross-examined by a ruthless defense attorney of national reputation. During a break, he introduced himself to her in the hallway outside the courtroom in Newport, after she had strongly disputed the allegations made by Kurt von Rautbord's lawyer about Antonia's alcoholism. "You were gutsy up there on the stand," said Gus. "Some people get so terrified they cry." "Wasn't he awful, that lawyer? So rude. Just who does he think he is, please? I certainly wasn't going to allow Kurt von Rautbord to say all those dreadful and deceitful things about poor sweet Antonia after he lived off her money all those years," answered Lil. "Antonia even paid his club dues at the Butterfield, for God's sake." It was Lil who introduced Gus to Marina and Fritz, Antonia's grown children from her first marriage to a Hungarian prince, with whom he became friends. It was also Lil who arranged for Gus to spend the night in the Newport mansion, where the attempted murder had taken place. Gus often said that if Lil Altimus hadn't been born so rich and married so rich, she could have been a very good detective. Lil was always thrilled when Gus said that about her in front of others. She sometimes bragged that he discussed all the murder cases he covered around the world with her. In fact, there were those who said Lil Altimus was Gus Bailey's source for one of his most successful books about the shooting of banking heir Billy Grenville at the hands of his wife, Anne. On this Easter Sunday, however, Lil's thoughts were concerned with her lunch party. "We're 24 in all. I've put you next to Adele Harcourt, Gus," said Lil, walking around her beautifully set table, checking place cards with the expertise of a great hostess. Gus had used Lil as a character in one of his society novels, Our Own Kind, and unlike others in New York society, she had not taken offense, nor had she stopped speaking to him as so many had. However, she did have one quibble with her character, as Gus wrote her. She insisted every time it came up that she was very definitely not the one who had said, "Better dead than Mrs. Fayed," the day after Princess Diana was killed in the automobile accident with her lover, the very rich Dodi Fayed, in the Alma Tunnel in Paris, as Gus had quoted her as saying. She had, of course, said it. Adele adores meeting writers. Now you must remember to speak up when you talk to her. She doesn't hear well, and she hates wearing the hearing aid. She's inclined to repeat herself a bit, but she's divine, simply divine. You know, she was my mother's best friend. They even worked at Vogue together back in the 30s. She's going to be 105 on her next birthday, bless her heart, and she still goes out nearly every night of the week, all dressed up and covered with jewels. I've heard through the grapevine that it's your birthday too, Lil, said Gus, teasing his old friend a bit. Lil also needed a hearing aid, but Gus wasn't about to go that far with her, as she might get upset. Yes, but we won't speak about that, please. She mouthed but did not speak the word 70, at the same time rolling her eyes at the ancientness of the decade she was entering. You'd never know it, said Gus, although he knew for a fact she was 75, the same age as Antonia von Routbord, who is still in a coma. You're so sweet, Gus, said Lil. How are things coming along on that ridiculous lawsuit of yours? Don't minimize it to me, said Gus. It's not ridiculous at all. I'm living it. It's time-consuming, expensive, and extremely nerve-wracking, and I hate to talk about it. I can't imagine that awful man suing you, said Lil. The terrible thing is that it's my own fault. I fell hook, line, and sinker for a fake story. I honestly thought I had the scoop of my career, and I made the fatal mistake of repeating it on a radio show of no importance, and the consequences have been dire. But let's not speak about Kyle Cramden or his terrifying lawyer. Even the mention of his name puts me into a despairing mood. Poor darling Gus, said Lil.